Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah Suter. Really excited to be here at DevOps Summit 2022. Talking to you today a little bit about shifting left with Harmony, finding that balance between security and developer efficiency. Let's go ahead and get started. Today, I'll talk to you a little bit about myself and my background. I'll talk to you about the challenges I see it in this space. We'll go through some different ways you may be able to find balance with this issue. And then I will do some takeaways so you have some nuggets to go home with. First of all, as I said, my name is Hannah. I'm a product manager at GitLab. I focus on authentication and authorization. I'm passionate about digital privacy and taking control of your digital footprint online. Cybersecurity. My background is in software development. As an engineer, I started asking too many questions about 8 years ago about why we're doing things and if I can start sitting in on customer calls. And so from there, it was a slippery slope to product. That's where I am today. And my background the last few years has been a lot in developer tooling and making platform-based products, specifically cloud platform. And in the past few years, I really honed in on the digital identity space. So the challenge I'm here to speak about today is the balance between security and developer efficiency. I'm sure you've seen this in action before at work, no matter where you sit in the DevOps lifecycle. Application security has certain requirements they need to meet, but sometimes they can feel like big roadblocks into the productivity of the people who are actually creating software. Whether they have to authenticate too many times with too many factors, or maybe they need permissions that they're not granted by default, the experience can be frustrating for both sides, both the people creating the software and the system admins who have to balance all of these human sort of needs behind the scenes. How do I know this? As I mentioned, at GitLab, I work in authentication and authorization. I talk to a lot of users, and we serve kind of two personas. We serve the persona that needs to access GitLab for their daily work, like the platform engineer or the release manager. And then we also talk to those who are in charge of executing security initiatives. So think systems admin. All of these people do want the same thing. They want secure, efficient software delivery, but the question is, how do we get there, right? So let me share some hard truths and some strategies for making progress in this area. First, I thought I would go through and show you a little bit, just some summarization from the perspectives of the research that I've done and the customers I've talked to. On the security side, they're worried about complying with a certain compliance standard and passing an audit. So they need to put certain controls into place. Obviously, they're also top of mind for them is protecting their company's intellectual property, protecting the code. They may want to implement zero trust, and what does that look like? They know that a breach would be disastrous. It feels like a lot of times we hear these breaches almost every day on the news, and no one wants their company's name to be in the headline. The developers, their needs are, hey, I just want to do my job efficiently and quickly, right? If I need access to something, I don't want to have to wait. I don't want to feel really locked down and babysat, right? I want to have the autonomy to do my job. So I think we can both understand where each of these perspectives are coming from, right? So our first hard truth of the session today, it's when trying to strike a balance between security and developer efficiency, let's remember that this is an ongoing journey. It's going to look different for every organization. And unfortunately, forget about being able to call this done and checking that checkbox. It will never be done. It requires constant iteration. And iteration is something that we love here at GitLab. It's one of our core values. It's about doing the smallest and the most valuable thing, putting it out into the world and getting feedback. We take this so seriously that we often say you're doing iteration right if you're slightly embarrassed by the minimal thing you're putting out there. So if you've ever felt that, good job iterating. As I go through this presentation, I want you to keep iteration at the top of your mind. So let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. Think about the ways you can use iteration to at least get started on small pieces of this information. Okay, let's talk about something that is our first line of defense in the digital world, and it's how our developers assert who they are and what they have access to. Welcome to access controls. I think it's important to give an extremely tech-savvy audience, like software developers, many different ways to access their DevOps tooling. Now, from the security perspective, we need to be sure that whatever authentication standards are enforced in one method. So let's say, for example, if we have our username and password pair and our engineer uses that to authenticate, then automatically they get hit with enforced multi-factor authentication. We need to make sure and be careful that, for example, using an access token, that would also check for a valid session and trigger the multi-factor authentication check. So we need to be sure that these standards are enforced in all areas and all surface areas of the platform equally. But I do believe that having so many ways to authenticate gives developers the freedom to quickly access their code, and they work in all kinds of different places. They might be working in the UI for 1 hour, and then switch to the CLI, and then maybe switch to a third-party tool that we can't even begin to anticipate. But thanks to open authentication standards, they can use it. So I think providing our developers flexibility here is really important. Okay, let's talk about identity providers. So what identity providers do is provide a single source of truth for identities. I'm sure you're familiar with these, Azure AD, Okta, Ping Identity. And I think an identity provider is a really valuable tool, both for developers and for security professionals. There's benefits for both. You can use one login across any of the products that are integrated with it. For an example, it's really nice if you're an employee of a company, you might be able to log in and manage your healthcare benefits with the same username and password you later use to push code. And this also really makes the security professional's life easier by having one place to manage identities and all of the overhead that comes with that. They provide really great tooling around multi-factor auth, including built-in biometrics and hardware keys, support for things like a YubiKey. And I'll be honest, sometimes identity providers even cover a broader range of security use cases than our homegrown in-app authentication. After all, identity is their specialty, right? We would expect them to provide a value over and above what most products have on their own. For example, our specialty is the DevOps platform. We're not looking to become the leader in authentication, but obviously integrating with products like these that do provide you such a great set of authentication features is really important. And I would definitely recommend that you use one. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about implementing access. So we always want to come at implementing access from the principle of least privilege. That is abbreviated PULP, and I hate that abbreviation. So I had to include my little orange juice picture because PULP always makes me think of orange juice pulp. It's a pretty simple cybersecurity principle. It states that people should have only the access needed, the bare minimum access needed in order to be able to do their job, so nothing more. I think a real world example of this that's kind of easy to understand is in a hotel. So anyone can walk into a hotel, right? Anyone can walk into the lobby, but from there, you really can't get very far. You need to have your key, which obviously only works on your room. But these days, you can't even click the button for the elevator unless you swipe your key first. And then once you're on the elevator, the only button you can push on the inside is the one that corresponds with the floor that your room is on. So this is really the principle in action. It's only getting access to what you need, nothing more. And how this is beneficial is in the case of a credential leak or a breach, the bad actor has access to much less than they would if the credential is granted unfettered access. So it sort of provides a smaller scope in case of attack. Okay, I've shared with you what PULP, my favorite acronym, means. And of course, it sounds good in theory, right? We'll keep our access levels low. And we have less risk whenever we're under attack. Awesome. What could go wrong, right? Not so fast. By granting the minimum levels of privilege, there will inevitably be a need for exceptions. There'll always be people that are coming to you as the system admin saying, I need more rights on this project in order to do X. Or, my coworker is sick. They normally have the most elevated rights. They're going to be out for a while. Can I have them? So these are just a couple examples. How do we balance facilitating these exceptions while keeping a good security posture? Here are a couple thoughts. Number one, limit it for the time. So if you need to, you can grant increased access, but only for the short window when it's needed. Remember to pull their access back down after they're done doing that sort of exception task. So there are scenarios where maybe someone's breadth across the product and what they're working on is expanded, but not necessarily their depth. So this may be an area where we're okay accepting that risk, right? Because maybe they get access to another project, but the role stays the same. They still can't do any really powerful actions. And maybe we allow things like that to kind of get approved automatically and have auditing behind the scenes in case. But not everything should require human intervention. And then lastly, have a way to monitor and revoke privilege. If you have a powerful user who grants admin access to another user, right? That's something that we should be alerted of and we should be able to revoke. So have those tools in your toolbox as well. Okay, we've talked a little bit about access and how this balance is an iterative process, right? So let's go now to another hard truth. This one is that at the end of the day, we can't lose sight of the fact that there are human hands on physical keyboards at the other end of our decisions. It can be really easy to brush over usability when it comes to security. Security feels urgent. It's mandated. It's strict. UX can feel warm and fuzzy, something that's like a nice to have, and something that, we'll get to whenever this more important stuff is done. I'm here to ask you to please give usability a seat at the table when it comes to security. Your developers and your bottom line will thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about what I mean. I thought I'd share some real-world examples from my time at GitLab, where we have prioritized security and we didn't consider usability at first. It was more of an afterthought. This has resulted in some feature enhancements that we're working on now, but should have probably been implemented from the start. The first one has to do with email verification. This is an email that any new user has to click to verify their account before it becomes active. The problem with this is that we did not consider usability. If a user's provisioned from an identity provider, which we talked about, we're already sure that they're a verified account. We don't need to make them verify again. This was illogical and it really didn't add any security, forcing these already verified accounts to verify again. It just added friction when users were logging in for the first time, and goodness, that is right when we want to give them a good impression of their new DevOps platform, right? So we recently changed this, so any user provision from an identity provider does not get this email. They're automatically verified. The second one is what you see here with this picture. We're building our out-of-the-box two-factor authentication, which is a must-have for security. But we didn't consider the workflows around users forgetting their recovery codes, losing a device, et cetera. So that means the extra layer of security of adding two-factor auth actually did come at a cost in lost productivity when developers, users of the platform were locked out of their accounts. They had to submit a ticket to get GitLab support to reset their 2FA. Not to mention, this is not something that we want our security or our support people to be spending time on either. So we were in a hurry to implement the security feature. We deprioritized the resulting workflows, and this was our end result. So as I speak, we're currently creating a self-service UI for GitLab group owners to reset their users' two-factor authentication, saving everyone a call to our support team. Okay, here I did table that shows you some controls you might implement for low risk, medium risk, and high risk activities within your DevOps platform. And yes, MFA is in the low risk because I think MFA is just table stakes. Everyone should be mandated to use MFA at this point for something that's as important as your company's IP. So as you can see, as we kind of go from left to right, our controls become more invasive as we go to high risk activities, and they are probably going to cause friction for the end user. But it can also prevent a disaster from happening. But at the same time, let's say we require approvals too often. Our users might become blind to the importance of them and just sign off on every approval without really looking at it. So remember when I said at the beginning that this was a balance? Yeah, I think you're seeing that firsthand here. Okay, for another hard truth. Now, this one might not be as hard of a truth as others because I think we all know it, but it's still something I want to call out. Security and development are intertwined. Security and product are intertwined. Security and customer support are intertwined. I could go on and on. Ultimately, security is everyone's responsibility. We can't just duck and hide from security thinking that, hey, that's what we have that team for, right? That's for them to worry about. In fact, security is coming up so often in DevOps these days. We have a whole new industry term, DevSecOps, which introduces security earlier in our software development process. In fact, GitLab released a DevOps survey a couple months ago, and 57% of organizations have already shifted security left or plan to in the upcoming year. So let me share with you some ways to shift security left at your organization into the merge requests and the pipeline phases of your software development process. These examples are taken from our daily life here at GitLab. So here's some ways we're shifting left. Every commit is scanned for security issues. Dependencies are scanned for vulnerabilities. Our engineers do have to go through a mandatory training on secure development practices. Our AppSec team reviews all of the merge requests before each release and flags anything that they're not comfortable with. And we also scan all of our commits with SAST and DAST. The pipeline won't pass if there is a security vulnerability. So the team won't be able to merge and they would have to go back and fix it before the pipeline will pass and it can be merged. Okay, so kind of to summarize some takeaways, some things I want to send you home with after listening to me talk today is that it is possible to iterate towards our security and developer efficiency balance. Remember to take it one small iterative step at a time. You don't have to solve everything today. That balance is super hard to achieve and will change over time. So be prepared to be flexible with this process and try to implement things, see what works. Maybe you take a couple steps forward in an area and a step back, but don't get discouraged. This is something that is a very worthwhile pursuit. And yeah, be flexible and iterative about it. I think it makes a lot of sense that we apply friction when there is an increased risk. So think of the highest risk activities that you're doing in your DevOps platform. And that is where we should be applying at least another layer of security, of a check, of a sign off. There's a billion different ways to implement this. But adding that friction when there's an increased risk makes a lot of sense. And then for those low risk activities, we really want to lean into that efficiency piece and let developers do their thing. Usability should be a first-class citizen in security. And this, I'm saying this as much for me as I am for the audience, because this is so easy to forget. But let's have usability at the table. Let's bring our UX counterparts into our security conversations and have them have input on how we can make this better, both for our platform users and for our customers. Lastly, security is shifting left. If it hasn't yet at your company, it will. This is the new reality. So it's certainly not just on the security team anymore and for them to worry about. It's for all of us to worry about. And we all have a hand in making sure that, the things we work on are protected, and just know that that doesn't necessarily have to come at an extremely painful cost, that there are ways to balance. And I hope that I've made that clear today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this. If you want to reach out, my email down there, it's hsuiter@gitlab.com. I'm on Twitter at hhsuiter. And thanks so much for being with me today. Hope you have a good rest of your sessions.